Walter Briggs heard the gate alarm chirp twice before he ever saw the trucks, and by the time he'd crested the rise above the south pasture, a woman in a company vest was standing in the gravel with a clipboard held up like something between a shield and a summons, telling a man to step out of his own truck. The man didn't move fast. He never did. Avery Boykin set both hands on the wheel where they could be seen, eased the door open, and climbed out slow and easy in his work boots and his faded canvas jacket. The kind of man whereas when he spent the morning checking fence line instead of dressing for company. He'd been up since 5, same as every morning that fall, out past the lower tank, checking a heifer that had gone off her feed, back by the barn to load mineral, and now headed up to walk the boundary the bank's letter had asked him to make available for inspection. He'd expected someone with a clipboard. He hadn't expected to be met at his own gate like a stranger asking permission to pass through. "Sir, I need to see some identification," the woman said. "This is private property under an active management review, and I don't have you logged as authorized personnel." "I'm not personnel," Avery said, even in quiet. "I am Avery Boykin. This is my land." Walter brought his truck to a stop short of the gate and sat a moment, watching it play out the way these things sometimes did, before he'd learned there was no good reason to keep sitting and watching once you understood what you were looking at. The woman's badge read M. Hutchins, Caldwell Field Services. She didn't lower the clipboard. "I'll need more than a name, sir. We've had trespassing issues on properties like this one under review. I may need to contact the county." Avery reached slow into his jacket, drew his wallet, and held the license out at arm's length so she wouldn't have to step any closer than she wanted to. She looked at it for less than 2 seconds before her eyes went back to her own clipboard, as if the name printed on the plastic hadn't told her a single thing she needed to know. "I can wait while you check whatever's in that folder," Avery said. "I expect my name's already in there somewhere, if you'll look for it." She didn't open it. Instead, she repeated, almost word for word, that she'd need to verify his right to be present, that the bank's review required confirmation before access could be granted, that this was simply procedure and nothing personal. Behind her, a second truck rolled up the drive, clean, white county survey plates, a man in a collared shirt with a leveling rod strapped across the bed. Hutchins turned, smiled, and waved him straight through the gate without a word exchanged, without so much as a glance at whatever identification he might or might not have been carrying, before turning back to Avery, as if nothing about that had happened at all. That was the part that finally got Walter out of his truck. He'd worked Boykin Ridge for 31 years, since he was 28, and Avery's father, Theodore, hired him on to mend fence and learn cattle the right way from a man who'd learned it from his own father before him. Walter had watched Theodore hand the operation to Avery a decade back, slow and deliberate, the way a person hands over something they carried a long way and had no intention of seeing dropped. He'd stood at the back of a packed chapel 3 months earlier when they buried Avery's mother, Odessa, the last of 3 generations who'd worked this rise of ground since 1931, when Avery's grandfather Elias had cleared the first 40 acres with a mule team and a debt nobody thought he'd pay off inside 10 years. He'd listened afterward, in the gravel lot outside the chapel, while a soft-spoken bank officer explained that the estate transfer meant a routine refinancing review. A property inspection. Paperwork. Nothing more. This did not look like nothing more. "Marlene," Walter said, walking up, "you want to tell me what exactly you're reviewing him for?" She glanced at him, an older white man in a feed store cap, unhurried, the kind of bearing that read as authority whether or not it was meant to, and some of the stiffness left her voice before she'd consciously decided to let it go. "Sir, this is a property compliance visit ahead of a refinancing approval. I just need to verify ownership before. You need to verify the man whose name is on every fence post from here down to the creek," Walter said. "That's Avery Boykin. His grandfather cleared this pasture with a mule team in 1931. His father ran cattle on it for 50 years. His mother's buried on the hill behind that barn. I'd start the verifying there, if it was me, before I started asking a man for his papers on his own ground." Avery said nothing to any of it. He had learned a long time ago, and at some cost, what a calm voice from him could be made to mean by people standing in front of him, deference to some, provocation to others, depending on what they'd already decided they needed it to be. So he stood easy, Hands loose at his sides, weight settled back on his heels, and let the morning go where it was going to go without trying to steer it himself. Hutchins finally opened the folder. Not, Walter would think later, turning it over on the long drive home that evening, because of anything he himself had said, but because there was nowhere left for her eyes to land that wasn't the page in front of her. She flipped past a cover sheet, past an aerial survey with the boundary lines marked in red ink, past a checklist of fencing and water source conditions she'd apparently come to assess, to a single type page near the back that looked like it had been printed, clipped in, and never once read by the person carrying it. Asterisk Boykin, Avery T., title holder of record. Predecessor in title, Boykin, Odessa M. Predecessor in title, Boykin, Theodore Sr. Predecessor in title, Boykin, Elias. Continuous family ownership of record since 1931. Asterisk. Walter watched her read it once, then a second time, more slowly, her thumb moving down the page as though she were checking it against something in her own memory and not finding a match. Her shoulders changed on the second pass, not dramatically, just a small settling, the kind a person does when the ground underneath turns out not to be the ground they thought they were standing on. This should have been the first thing I opened, she said, mostly to the page, not to either of them. Before I said a word to you. I am sorry. You should have, Avery agreed, not unkindly, not warmly either. Most folks who come through that gate get the courtesy of being asked their business before they're accused of trespassing on it. I'd have appreciated the same. She didn't argue the point, and to her credit, she didn't reach for the words that might have made it smaller than it was. Misunderstanding, policy, a busy morning, sir, you have to understand. She closed the folder, asked if he'd give her a few minutes, and called her supervisor at Caldwell Field Services right there in the gravel, not stepping off to where he couldn't hear. Walter caught most of it anyway, standing close enough, not troubling himself to look like he wasn't listening. Hutchins laid out plainly what she'd done, approached the title holder before reviewing the assignment file, demanded identification he'd already produced, waved his second visitor through the same gate without asking him for anything at all, and she didn't trim the account of her own conduct in the telling, not even with the man she'd confronted standing 3 feet away listening to every word of it. I'll need you to pull the full file today, she said into the phone, and I think someone above me needs to call Heritage Trust before end of business, not Monday. I want this documented the way it happened. I don't want it cleaned up before it gets to anybody. It took less than a week for the rest to follow, the way these things tend to once the right name finally lands on the right form in front of the right person. Heritage Trust's loan officer, a woman named Carla Brennan, who had handled the Boykin family's accounts for 11 years and had managed in all that time never once to meet Avery in person, the file having simply moved between desks long before she'd inherited it, drove out to the ranch herself on a Thursday morning. She brought a letter, not an email routed through a compliance inbox, signed to her own hand, and she read part of it aloud, standing in the same gravel where it had happened, the folder this time open on the hood of her car for anyone who wanted to look at it. The bank's own protocol requires confirming title status before any field contractor approaches a landowner, she said. That confirmation was sitting in the file we sent her. She should never have had to open it at your gate to find out who you were, and she certainly shouldn't have had to be told twice. She looked up from the page. I should have come out myself, the first time, instead of sending someone who'd never met your mother or your father or you. That's on me as much as it's on her. I'm sorry it took this to get me out here at all. Caldwell Field Services pulled Hutchins from the Boykin file within the day and, inside the month, rewrote its field verification checklist company-wide. No contracted agent could step out of a vehicle on an active property review without first confirming ownership against the recorder's document already in hand. Not after confrontation, not as a courtesy extended once challenged, but before a single word was spoken to whoever answered the gate. The new procedure went out to every field office with Hutchins's own incident report attached as the training example. At her request, her name left in it. The refinancing itself, which had nearly stalled in the confusion of that morning, closed 2 weeks later under Avery's own name, on his own terms, with Carla Brennan walking the paperwork through herself from start to finish, the way it should have gone from the beginning, with no contractor sent ahead of her to do the part she should have done in person. None of it undid the morning. Exactly. Avery was not a man who mistook a letter, however sincerely meant, for the thing itself. Once a thing had already happened in front of witnesses, on his own gravel, under his own name, with a stranger waved through the same gate without a question asked of him. But he didn't carry it the way some men might have, either. He was back checking fence the next day. Same boots, same jacket, same unhurried way of moving through a world that had, for one morning, declined to recognize him on land his family had held for nearly a century. Walter thought about it longer than anyone, if he was honest with himself, turning it over some evenings at his own kitchen table until his wife asked him, gently, to let it rest. He thought about the 2 seconds Hutchins had spent looking at a license that already held the whole answer printed plainly across it, and the folder she'd carried half a mile up that drive, without once opening it, and how easily the morning could have gone differently if he hadn't crested that rise at just the right minute. And then he thought, longer and less comfortably, about how little that timing should have mattered in the first place. Avery shouldn't have needed a 31-year foreman happening by to lend the moment its weight. He should have needed nothing more than the name already sitting on the page in her hand, and the simple courtesy of having that page opened first. That fall, when the County Historical Society came out to mark the ranch's place on its heritage registry. 93 years, 4 generations, the same family working the same rise of ground since 1931. Walter stood at the back of the small gathering by the front gate post, had his hands, and watched Avery shake hands with the society's chairwoman, unhurried, the way he did most things. Carla Brennan had come, uninvited but welcome, standing near the back of the small crowd with a paper cup of coffee, saying nothing, just present. Someone had screwed a small bronze plate into the post beside the old hand-lettered sign, Boykin Ridge Ranch, St. 1931. It didn't say a word about a morning in the gravel, a clipboard, a folder that took too long to open. It didn't need to. The name had been there the whole time, carved and repainted and carried forward by hand through every generation that had worked the ground beneath it. It had only ever taken someone willing to read it before they spoke.